What is it?
The main thing I got from it was like this sense of feeling seen and validated.
Well, why does it have to be this way?
This book was placed in my hand for this moment.
Insightful, learned a lot, wrote some quotes that I'm ready to like paint on my wall.
I love this book!
That we just kind of pull out some of the big themes that we see and talk about a few different ones.
I apologize if most of my contribution has K-pop references.
Alternative book title, The Feminine Mystique Part 2. You were really just gay all along. Welcome to Book Club.
With Julia.
And Victoria.
We are two lifelong friends who read a book and talk about it each episode.
This is a podcast where we explore new perspectives and use books as tools for personal and community growth.
This week we are reading Take a Hint, Dani Brown by Talia Hibbert. It's another contemporary romance fiction novel set on like a university campus.
This week, we're super excited to have a guest here, Chelsea Kuchik. Welcome, Chelsea.
Thank you.
Ooh.
Chelsea is the bookish babe behind the Instagram account at chelsea.is.reading, where you can follow all her reading updates, be it romance, contemporary literature, or therapy-adjacent books, along with the snaps of her bullet journal spreads. Chelsea is a self-proclaimed overshare, ENFP, and loves picking up craft hobbies, even if she rarely finishes them. Welcome, Chelsea.
Thank you both. It's so exciting to be here. I feel like a celebrity.
You basically are.
You guys, you're gassing me up. I don't know.
Celebrity guest.
Oh,
yeah.
So exciting.
So, Chelsea, we kind of were like, hey, we want to read Talia Hibbert. We've seen you read them. Pick a book. What was your initial experience reading Take a Hint, Dani Brown?
So I started the Brown series with Get a Life, Chloe Brown, which is the first. And it actually was my first post on my Bookstagram, which is funny because I had read a bunch of historical romances, but I was like, feel like contemporary romance is kind of the way to start this thing off. I loved that book so much. So I was like, oh my God, I need the second book immediately. And it was like, there were no holds on it at my library. I got it immediately. So I will always be waving my Talia Hibbert flag. Like, I'm waiting for this thing to be like, you need to wait 3 months to get this book because it's worth it. But I mean, as soon as I found out she was like a witch and it was an interracial romance and like she's a sexy professor and he's like a grumpy security guard, I was like, sign me up. Talia Hibbert could write anything and I would read it, but this one is like peak for me.
So I don't even know where I originally saw this book series, because maybe it was on Instagram or just like out and about in the book world. But I remember reading an article actually while we were preparing for a different episode of this podcast. But I was like, oh, like romance fiction, and kind of went down a little rabbit hole and was reading all about Talia Hibbert and the Brown Sisters series and like her commitment to representation and romance fiction, and yeah, just like an interesting interview with her. So I was like, oh, like maybe I'll like add that to my to read pile. So I was glad to like have an excuse to like go do it. And I actually went and bought the book, which I don't buy many books, but I was like, oh, I feel like this is a recurring theme. Victoria's sad and lonely and goes to a bookstore and ends up buying things. But I was like, oh, we're going to do this on the podcast. Like, I'll own it. And I'm actually really glad I do, because I do think this could be a romance novel that I would reread. I don't tend to reread any books, but this one I really enjoyed. I think, yeah, there's just like, we'll get into it, but there's so much about each character that I find like particularly interesting and relatable, and like, yeah, just overall very enjoyable read. Definitely did the like read a little bit at a time until you get to a certain point and you're like, oh my gosh, just get together. And then I had to like stay up till 1 a.m. and read like a huge chunk of the book.
We've covered enough romance novels on the podcast and the topic in general to firmly establish that I do not really do romance. And like, listeners of our podcast have heard me talk about every single romance novel that I've ever read, and so that is a total of 3, including this one.
Wow.
There aren't very many romantic movies I enjoy either. I don't really understand them. They make me kind of anxious, which is funny than reading about a character in this book who reads romance novels because he's anxious and they calm him down. And I was like, it's the opposite for me, bro, but I think I understand. And so I definitely like skimmed some sections, but I have to say, I really like Talia Hibbert, like the writer. I really like her voice. I think she's got comedic timing. I think she's really relatable. Like, I don't know. I feel like she's good at writing stuff that feels real, like a real person would experience it. So if we did another one of her books on the podcast, I would not object. I'm just putting that out into the ether.
Season 9 planning coming up.
This feels like a real compliment. Like, I'm not Talia Hibbert, so I can't take this directly, but I'm just so glad because I knew there was kind of some dissonance in how you both enjoy or don't enjoy romance. So this is so cool to hear.
Yeah. I don't know. I thought she did a really good job, and I'm learning, I think, that how much I connect to the author as a writer, like their voice or their personality or their own experiences has a huge impact on whether or not I like the book. This is something I'm learning about myself. Yeah, I relate to her in a lot of ways. And so that, like, it just really comes through. And I'm like, I want to be her friend now.
Yeah.
That's how I felt at the end of this book. I was like, yes, I'm happy they got together, but I really want to be Talia Hibbert's, like, BFF.
Oh my God. She's actually on TikTok too, and some of her TikToks are just so cute and relatable. I'm like, you're a normal person.
So, speaking of Talia Hibbert, Victoria.
So this is just a little bit of her bio on her personal website. So Talia Hibbert is a New York Times, USA Today, and Wall Street Journal bestselling author who lives in a bedroom full of books. Supposedly, there's a world beyond that room, but she's yet to drum up enough interest to investigate. She writes steamy, diverse romance because she believes that people of marginalized identities need honest and positive representation. Her interests include makeup, junk food, and unnecessary sarcasm. Talia and her many books reside in the English Midlands. So, the Brown Sister series is one of multiple series that Talia Hibbert's written. Follows 3 sisters, so each have their own book, as Chelsea kind of alluded to already. And this is book number 2 in the series, which might feel like we're going out of order, but Chelsea told us these were her favorite characters, so we're like, we'll skip book number 1.
Yeah.
That is the beauty of romance, too. I think some authors do it better than others, but a lot of these books are written in a way that you can read the standalone or the whole series, which I appreciate as a reader.
Yeah. The only thing that, like, it's just, like, chronologically the order they come out, not necessarily, like, chronologically in their world, like, when the books are placed, but less, like, building on each other in the same way that maybe a series of other books would. Okay, so before we dive in fully, Julie, do you want to give us like a rundown what happens in this book?
Yes, I would. So, Dani Brown is a career-driven woman who has kind of given up on love and relationships because she's been told one too many times that she's not good at them, in quotes. And then Zaf Ansari is a former rugby player whose family tragedy has led him to hide away as a security guard at Dani's university so he can cope with his anxiety and read his romance novels in peace. They've been flirting for a few months when Zaf rescues Dani from an elevator during a fire drill, and they go viral on Twitter, which is like my nightmare. And then Zaf thinks very reluctantly that maybe it's a chance at happily ever after, and maybe a way to bring some positive promo to his organization. And Dani thinks it's a sign from a goddess that she should get laid. Will they take the hint? And after lying to themselves for approximately 80 pages, yes, they will. It takes a while, but they get there. So yeah, that's the plot. It's got, it's got some classic romance novel setup, and it's, how it ends. So it's impossible to spoil.
God bless the HEA, the happily ever after. I mean, I can get into it now. Like, there is a lot of discourse, but essentially to be a romance novel, you need to have a happily ever after. Yeah. And I think some people poo-poo it. They're like, okay, well, then you've ruined the book for me. I'm like, you read a mystery and you would hope the mystery gets solved. Like, what a terrible book if you don't feel like you know what's going to happen at the end. And it's that sweet, sweet build-up, baby. Like, that's what I'm here for.
Yeah, it's about the process and, like, seeing... I mean, I'm that way with most genres where, like, I'll sneak peek further on down the book so that I know kind of what to expect, and then I go back and, like, can enjoy the journey because I don't need to worry about where we're going to end up. So
totally.
I'm a firm believer in predictable endings.
You don't know how you're going to get there. Like, there's still so many avenues it can take. It's just like, it's going to be a happy ending. That's just sometimes, like in a pandemic, that's what you need.
Yeah. So, Chelsea, I read a little bit about your kind of entry into the romance genre and your world on Instagram. Would you want to share a little bit of like how you got into the genre as a whole, and then we'll like get into the book more?
100%. My origin story.
Yes.
So I actually did some deep thinking on this, and I read a lot of romance in like middle school. I guess middle school. Like I read like Sarah Dessen.
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh.
Good times.
Yeah.
And then I stopped because I became a pretentious high schooler that was like, I read good literature. And like, you know, we all had that phase. It's like reading Catcher in the Rye and thinking like I was really getting something from it.
Mm-hmm.
But I did read Twilight in high school, and during the pandemic, like many people, there was kind of this like Twilight renaissance on TikTok where people were like, hey, remember this thing? It actually still kind of holds up, even though it's also kind of a mess. And I was just having a really rough go. The pandemic was really hard for me. I deal with anxiety and depression, and I'm really open about it. But rereading that book series with my friend, like, was so fun. It was just reading for pure enjoyment, like no judgment. And I kind of took that vibe and ran with it. I saw Bridgerton when it came out around Christmas time, January. And I was like, dude, I gotta buy these books. Like, even if it's just for a laugh, even if it's super corny. And I loved them. They were really like well written. The banter was fun. And I started like being the dealer. Like my friends had liked Bridgerton too. And I'd be like, oh, just try this book. And then they'd come back and want another one. So I'm really open about mental health and stuff on my personal Instagram, but people were really enjoying my content about books and stuff. So I was like, dude, why don't I just like take the jump? And I did. And Bookstagram has been such a great and open community for me. I share what I read. I share like a little synopsis and just my reviews. My favorite part of my reviews being like, you'll like this book if you like, and like all my weird bullets. Yeah, that was a very long-winded way of saying I just like am leaning into reading what makes me happy.
Yeah, I love that. I also jumped into a reread of Twilight, just the first book. Maybe it was like 2018 or something like that. And I remember telling Julia, like, hey, I know we used to shit on these books all the time. Like, I read all four back in like high school or junior high, whenever that was. But I was rereading them. I'm like, I also see the problems with like Bella and Edward's relationship and like a lot of the other things that we take issue with. But I was like, I get why we were into these, or like why I was into these. I don't think Julie ever was. But I'm like, oh, I get it. I remember, sorry, now I'm on a Twilight tangent, but I remember there was another girl in band with me in high school, and she had like, you know when you could people would like make book covers?
Yeah.
Like they would for like the textbooks, but she did it for like a novel she was reading. I'm like, what is it? And she's like, oh, it's Twilight, but everyone's going to give me a hard time if they see it. And so she like covered it up. And I'm like, I feel like that is like the epitome of what romance novel culture is. It's like so many of us want to read it, but so many of us feel shamed by it, or like other people will shame us for reading it.
Let me tell you, as a teen who worked at a water park the year that 50 Shades of Grey came out, I can tell you all the weird ways these women were hiding this book that they were obviously reading. Some were like blatantly out there. Others were like, yeah, doing the cover situation. But I totally believe that. And I think romance has expanded. I think the pandemic has actually done a lot of great things for the genre, including like TikTok. I just think has really helped people find their niche, like even if it's not romance, like whatever kind of books they want. And I'm just like so eternally grateful. It's such a great community of people. There are pockets of the internet that are dark and terrible. The romance community is like the antithesis of that. They're like, what do you like? I'm going to find it for you. There is a romance book for you. And that's what I love about it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
This podcast is made possible by our wonderful book club members. You can support the show by becoming a member on buymeayourcoffee.com/bookclubwithjv. So Julie and I are readers. We like to talk about books, but we're also writers. And so with our book club members, we love to share newsletters of things happening in our personal lives, as well as essays, poetry, other things we're writing. So starting at $3 per month, book club members can connect with fellow listeners, help us select books for future episodes, unlock exclusive newsletters, poems, etc. that we write, and get early and discounted access to future events. If you want to take your support to the next level, you can also join the TISM tier, which starts at $5 per month. The TISM tier is all about autism. Are you an autistic person looking for community, a possible neurodiverse person looking for resources, or an ally hoping to learn from an actually autistic person? Members of this tier get access free to Julia's autism-related articles on Medium, The best part of any book club, besides the books, is the community. So join us in our growing community of book nerds by becoming a member of the book club today. You can follow the link in our show notes or go to buymeacoffee.com/bookclubwithjv to join the party. Now back to the books. Chelsea, you mentioned one of the reasons you picked this book for us to read together is that you love Zaf as a character. So what about his character resonates with you?
Oh my God. Well,
or you like about him, and it doesn't necessarily have to resonate with you.
He is like one of my top 3 romance heroes. I am a sucker for like the grumpy guy with a heart of gold.
Oh my God. Gets me every time.
Every time. Because it's just his exterior. Like, you get in there, he's all ooey gooey and sweet. I love that he not only suffers from anxiety, but like he's done the work. Like, he has had a lot of personal trauma. And I think if you look at older romance or even just like novels in general with men, they have all this like trauma, and they have the woman like kind of comes into their life and helps them heal or helps them gain an ounce of emotional intelligence. And Zaf's like, oh, no. Like, I'm extremely emotionally intelligent. Like, I've done my work. And that's really sexy.
Yeah.
We love that.
Mm-hmm.
I have one last thing, actually, I guess I will say. How can I not love Zaf because he loves romance novels? Like, a man who is reading romance novels and he's not afraid. Like, he's embarrassed when the audiobook starts playing out loud, which my worst nightmare. There's a TikTok of a woman who she was listening to her romance novels while she was cleaning her house, but she realized that her outdoor speakers were on max volume, and she was blasting her fairly erotic romance novel to her whole neighborhood. I'm very comfortable with what I read, but I don't necessarily want to broadcast it like a tornado warning to my neighborhood.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I think I would just melt into the floor and die.
I would move. Witness protection.
Yeah.
Did you guys like Zaf? Like, I feel very biased. I mean, this book is so obviously also like a love letter to romance novels. Like, the way that she writes Zaf's explanation about romance novels and how they can be used to kind of help your personal development. Like, he has a whole like monologue about why romance novels are great, but I'm biased. So I'm curious, like, did you guys like that?
Yeah, I mean, yes. I really liked them both. I thought they were both really well-written, kind of down-to-earth characters. They felt like real people. My favorite characters in stories tend to be the ones that have some kind of hard external shell and are actually, marshmallows. I felt like they both had different versions of it. Like, they were both kind of intimidating for various reasons, either because of stereotypes or because they're very opinionated or whatever. But, that kind of arch sarcasm on the outside is really just covering over, like, they've been hurt really, really badly and have a lot of pain and shame, and when they open themselves up to each other are just so gentle and caring and sweet, and it's just adorable. Like, those were some of my favorite moments, was when they would be kind to each other and would be shocked that they were receiving kindness. And they were like, I'm sorry, you saw my pain and were like, yes, I like you anyway. I don't believe it. That doesn't seem real. Like, that, to me, that's some incredible stuff. So, yeah, I really liked how she built them as characters for each other as well.
I also, really appreciated Talia Hibbert's, approach towards writing a character who deals with anxiety, because that's something I also can relate to, and I think it was probably the best, fictional representation of someone going through a panic attack that I've found. I mean, I haven't read a ton of stuff or seen a lot of stuff with anxious characters centered in it, but specifically, I think back to, the TV show Newsroom, which I absolutely love. And I think it's episode 1. I don't know, one of the characters has, a full-blown panic attack plus, PTSD. There's a lot wrapped into it. And, very, male hero characters, you're okay. And she's like, you're right, I'm okay. And it's that's not how that works usually. No. And so I think, going back to what you said, Chelsea, Zaf has, done the work. He can go through that experience and know, I understand what's happening to my body. I know what works for me. I just need to sit here for a little bit, and I'm not forcing you to make me okay to Dani, but also is able to like kind of, I don't know, do what he needs to do. And Dani, as like a sympathetic character, can also be like, yeah, when I heard you were anxious, I went and like Googled it. And I'm like, that is so sweet. It takes no work. But she's like, I went and Googled and read a few things. And I'm like, I think she also had some experience supporting people in her life. I can't imagine one Google search taught her how to be like a good support during a panic attack, but I'm like, okay, like we'll believe it. But yeah, anyways, I thought it was really well handled in the book, and it was like an element of his personality. It like threaded through a lot of his experiences, but it wasn't like there was no individual aspect of their personality that like overwhelmed the whole or made like the sole focus of the book. I appreciate it was a multicultural, multiracial relationship, and it was acknowledged and discussed in a way that makes sense as humans, not like this is the entire center of the plot, is that they're from two different cultures.
I just think she is so good at that. Like at any point, I feel like her books, because it's the same thing in Get a Life, Chloe Brown, right? Like she's a plus size Black woman with chronic pain, and he is like a white dude, like, and he's got all his baggage too. But it could be like, oh, the conflict is that they're two different races. The conflict could be her chronic pain, and it's never, even in this book, it's like it's layered.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out how to describe how Dani's bisexuality was dealt with as well, because it wasn't like the Schitt's Creek approach where we just pretend that homophobia and differences in cultures and whatever just don't exist. But it also was like a non-issue, you know? Like it was just a thing about her. But the way that she kind of dealt with it in a way that felt like, yes, this is how normal humans would have this conversation of like, Zaf is a very anxious person and is trying so hard to be respectful of her and not assume things about her. And so he's like super awkward trying to figure out like, do you like men? And it's really sweet, but it's not like a point of conflict, or they're not like assholes to each other about it, but it feels realistic. I feel like that's a good example for me of how she adds in these layers of diversity in a way that's like, yeah, this is what a human person would do in this situation without blowing it out of proportion or pretending it doesn't exist, or, you know.
Yeah.
100%.
I feel like it's not, we'll get into tropes shortly, but the tropes aren't like a Romeo Juliet, like we're star-crossed lovers who can't be together because we're of different races. And
Right.
It's not like the often used and sometimes mostly harmful stereotypes of bisexuality of like they cannot be trusted. Or like the dilemma isn't she's trying to decide like, should she be with a man or should she be with a woman? It's like, am I ready to be vulnerable in a relationship, period? And her sexuality isn't a factor in that. It's just an element of her life.
I will say that's also why I like romances with people who aren't teenagers. I read a YA romance, and like they're adults. Like you can tell when he calls her, I think he calls her beautiful. He might say pretty. I don't remember which one. And she's like, as a plus size Black woman, like I've had to learn to be comfortable with myself because I get a lot of the opposite from the world. And it's like, even though we will all agree probably that Dani's less emotionally intelligent or in a place that maybe Zaf is in, like they know what they want, and they've kind of been through the, like, they're not having this like crazy coming out story or anything like that. Like that's foundation that's already here. And I appreciate that.
That's a good point. I didn't even think about, is that a lot similar to you. A lot of the romance I read was YA, and then I like didn't read any romance for a while. And so it does kind of feel like, oh yeah, it's different reading about characters who are closer to my age now and have done maybe as much emotional work as I have, or like had experiences in multiple relationships, where it is really great as a teenager to read like how other teens navigate their first relationship. Like I don't really need that at 26.
Nope.
I like reading about adults going through life things, but also have like worked through some shit already.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about tropes.
I love talking about tropes.
So there are some tropes in here. I mean, it's a very classic like fake dating situation. It's literally a fake dating story. So as realistic as, you know, we can talk about, like there are definitely some classic romance tropes in here. But also the gender roles are a bit reversed and so I was wondering, Chelsea, like you've read the most romance of anyone here. Like, how do the tropes in this book compare in terms of, like, all the romance novels you've read?
Totally. Great question. And I will be the first to say that historical romance is 100% like my jam. I do read contemporary romance, but I've definitely had more experience in the historical romance realm, which leads itself to kind of more traditional gender roles. Now, that is not necessarily always true, but I would say Talia's just, I think, always pushing the envelope a little bit, though. Like, we definitely get more like headstrong women, motivated, but I really love the levels of acceptance of vulnerability being switched. I think that's a gender role that I don't always see switched as much. Then again, pining hero is one of my favorite tropes where it's like the dude falls in love before she does and he's got to kind of convince her. So I would say from that perspective, like it definitely is there. You can find it, but I think this one's done really well. And as if we're talking about fake dating too, I think that's a trope that's really hard to write because we don't see it a lot, like ever.
Yeah, it's not a thing.
And Zach even says, he's like, this is in my books, but this isn't real life. And that's another one of Talia Hibbert's little, like, I know how this genre works kind of things she sprinkled in there. But I can bring up another trope that I saw in this book, because now that I'm like aware of the tropes, I like really look for them. The groveling, usually it's a groveling hero, right? Like he screwed up really bad. He has to make up for it with this big grand gesture, but the gender roles again were flipped, and she's the one who kind of messed it up and does this big kind of like, I'm sorry. And I think that's really refreshing to see it from that perspective.
Yeah. I also liked how she, gave her apology in a way that she knew he would resonate with, but it's very explicitly like, I went and read your books and I'm doing the grand gesture of romance novels, not like Zaph's best friend was like, you know what Zaph really likes? His name in flowers or whatever it is that she does at the end on a rugby pitch or something like that. It's not like, oh, this makes total sense in like everyday world. It's more like, we understand this is a romance trope, and we get like the wink, wink, nod, nod from Talia of like, we know this is pulled straight from the novels, less from real life, but I think that's what makes it particularly like adorable.
Yeah. I have a question I've brought to the space for you guys because I love tropes. And I honestly will say fake dating is not anywhere on my top 5, but tropes exist outside of romance novels, right? Like they're in movies, they're in TV shows. And I know my favorite romance tropes, but I'd love like if you guys could tell me if you have any that really resonate.
I do like the friends to lovers like element of this book, and in general. Like my mom watches a lot of Hallmark movies, especially around the holidays, and so I watch them with her. And I do love the ones where it's like, oh, this is a person I used to know, but it's different now, or I didn't realize like what I had. I think it's also like part of like my childhood in a way of like, I always thought like, oh, I'm going to be like best friends with someone and then we're going to fall in love. Did not happen currently in my life. I met my partner on a dating app, but it was wonderful. And I think it's actually more realistic for our age of dating. But I love to hear from people that were like, we were friends for years. I never gave this person a second look. And then something happened and we like really connected on a romantic level we hadn't connected before. I just think it's so sweet. Yeah, I'm not super, I have to like look at a list of tropes, but I'm trying to think through like movies I enjoyed.
Sometimes what helps too is I think of TV shows. Like I think a lot of people really like Jim and Pam, and that trope with office romance. My closer favorite one, I love forced proximity. So like maybe you're stuck on this sort of mission with each other. Like I'm really into the X-Files right now. And they're just forced to work together all the time, and they definitely love each other. I don't know, Julia, do you have anything that like really makes your heart soar?
I've seen like the TikToks or whatever of like what your favorite trope says about you. And I think the most accurate one is enemies to lovers.
So good.
The sort of, I don't know if this is true, but it feels true, where if you like enemies to lovers, like you like the idea that someone could see the worst parts of you and still fall in love with you anyway. And you're just like, oh, cool. I didn't want to be read like a book today. And yeah, because I was saying of the kinds of characters that I typically like, it's kind of harsher on the outside and softer on the inside. And those characters are typically put in stories where they don't like each other at first. Even like an enemies to friends. Oh my God. kills me. Like, it doesn't even have to be like a romance trope, but like that process of just people, I guess maybe even a forced proximity where they like really can't stand each other, but they have to be around each other. And then they slowly get to know each other as people. And yeah, anything in that kind of realm, I really enjoy. And a trope that really drives me crazy, actually, I was surprised, Victoria, you brought it up, although I guess not really, but it's the love of your life helps you through a panic attack trope. I am so over it. It's so done. I'm like, it's almost never represented accurately, and I hate that like a moment like that could be used as a tool, because it presents the idea that like having really bad anxiety is just a chance for someone to come in and help you.
Yeah.
I'm not a big fan of that. So when I saw it in this book, I was like, okay, I guess I don't hate this one.
I think because it's existing within another trope. It's
Yeah.
existing within this, like, friends to lovers plus fake relationship. I think it happens too at a part in the book where, like, they've built a lot of respect for each other and trust for each other, and this kind of, like, deepens it in a way of, like, and the fact that he feels confident that he can handle these experiences on his own. I think what really drives me crazy, too, with the hero swoops in or person swoops in when the other person is like struggling is that the answer becomes this person saved me or this person can fix me versus like I have worked through this on my own. Like I've done the work, I've gone to therapy, I recognize what's happening, and I appreciate that you feel like this is okay. You know, like that you're not turned off in our relationship because of this element of myself.
I will say reading this book too, I know Talia Hibbert uses sensitivity readers and you can tell. Like she's like, I am not a person of South Asian descent. And so I have a reader for that. And I think it's the same thing with mental health stuff. And it shines through because when it's done bad, it's done real bad.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I think some of my least favorite tropes, definitely like the mistaken identity or amnesia. First of all, because amnesia does not work that way. And second of all, I will get on my soapbox once again that mistaken identity makes me extremely uncomfortable. I hate that kind of like dramatic irony of like, oh, we think you're so-and-so. And they're like, okay, yeah, I'll be so-and-so to like fit in this place. And I'm just like, you're lying, you're lying, you're lying. I'm so uncomfortable. And I'm just like ready for like the other shoe to drop when people realize like, you're not that person. What's the, it's a Netflix Christmas romance movie my mom and I watched last year. I can't believe I made it through the whole thing, but she's a baker from Chicago. And
Vanessa
she goes to a
Hudgens
baking
one.
competition. Yes, the Vanessa Hudgens one. And it's basically The Prince and the Pauper, but with a princess and a love story and a baking competition where it's like, I want to be a normal person for a day. Let's switch roles. And it ends fine, but the whole time I'm like, stop trying to be a princess, no one believes it. Stop trying to be a baker, no one believes it. Just live your own life. Maybe you could have been friends anyways.
I love that, like, too, in those movies, the biggest conflict is like, is she gonna win the baking competition? It's like, Hallmark movies are like badly written romance novels to me. Like, that's really what they are.
Well, yeah, I feel like that's part of my impression of what romance novels are and why every single time I pick up one that's like well written, I'm shocked because my understanding of what they are is Hallmark movies. And I'm like, I cannot stand Hallmark movies. I can't do it.
They're too trying to please everyone, I feel like. Like a Hallmark movie is trying to be as non-controversial as possible. And that's why I love these books because, like, I could see this as a movie in my mind reading it. Like, I think it just works so well. But do I think it would be picked up? I don't know. Maybe like 10 years from now. Who knows what kind of world we'll live in then. But I agree with you, Julia. Like, romance needs better PR. That's why I'm here.
Exactly.
I guess the last note I'll say on tropes is like people sometimes give tropes a bad rep too. They're like, oh, you're just relying on these things. But just how we've talked here, you can see how many different directions you can take it. And I think romance does a really good job of just being like, find your flavor. Like if you know you like there's only one bed left in the inn or you like sick comfort, I got you. Like you can literally just look online based on tropes that you know you're going to like. And I find that really refreshing. I do try and expand outside of my box a lot, but why not go back to what you know you're going to love every once in a while? Because I think people look at romance a lot and they're like, those are the sex books. I mean, there's a lot of sex in this book. I will say, like, on the spicy scale, it's kind of going up there. But what's beautiful about romance is like the emotional buildup and all of those pieces of intimacy that are not sex that make the sex so good when you get to it, in my opinion. That's the other PR piece that I would love for more people to understand. Like, yeah, there's sex. Sex is a part of relationships for like a lot of people, but it's the building of intimacy and the types of different ways to connect with people that really make these books beautiful, because they're not plot driven books, right? These are mostly character development driven books. Like, things happen, but it's mostly what's going on the inside, right? And I love that.
Okay, so speaking of spicy scale.
Yeah. What is that?
This is a new term for me, honestly, until I started following you and like a few other like romance novel readers on Instagram.
Yeah.
What is the spicy scale?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you don't really need a spicy scale for like a lot of contemporary literature. But yeah, I mean, in the romance world, spice is just referring to the level of like overt sexiness, sex, whatever you want to say. And people have different levels of comfort with it. And even like if I'm recommending to someone younger, like especially with YA novels, it's like I probably don't want to give them like a super crazy book. So yeah, spicy scales are a good way. Not only like would you rate a book by stars, but you'd rate it by spicy. A lot of times people just do the chili emoji. And that kind of helps them gauge like, okay, where's this book going to take me? Because the last thing I want is like someone clutching their pearls and being like, oh, no, I was not mentally prepared for this. So I would say this is a great way to kind of gauge if this is your first romance. I usually rate out of 5, and I'm pretty sure I rated this one. I'm actually just going to check the post right now. I rated it 4 out of 5 chilies. I will say this is when I was early on in my reading experience. I think I would go back today and give it like a 3.5. The ways I help to kind of decide is how they describe sex. So is it like kind of like veiled, in the way that they're talking about things, or are they using the actual words for the body parts? How often is this happening? Yeah, is it like closed door? Is it like, oh, we started making out and then the camera pans and it's the next day? So that kind of all leads into my spicy ratings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think how this book compares to like others we've read on the podcast, it's been a little bit, but we read The Wedding Date by Jasmine Guillory. And that book I think I would rate lower on the spicy scale, because for the most part you get basically foreplay and then kind of like the fade to black, wake up next day kind of deal, with like a reference back to what happened instead of like in the moment. Whereas I think Talia Hibbert keeps you in the room much longer.
She is a very sexy writer. Like, she writes sexy works, and I make sure people know before they get into it. But yeah, you're in the room.
Yeah, I was not prepared.
I'm sorry, Julia.
I tried. I was like, Julia, this one's sexier than the last, but I don't think I was like firm enough in my I should have employed a spicy scale, as Chelsea was telling us about.
Now we know. Now we have the spicy scale.
Okay, so Chelsea, you mentioned the Bridgerton effect as we were getting ready for this. So what is the Bridgerton effect?
Well, I feel like I am a product of the Bridgerton effect, and that's just that the series did so well on Netflix. I mean, up until Squid Game, it was the most watched. I think it was 83 million households watched the show.
Wow. And
I just think Bridgerton is such a great example of the beauty of a romance novel, right? And I think the adaptation to screen worked so well. And I mean, like, Kim Kardashian was tweeting about it. Like, everyone was so obsessed with the Duke and Daphne, and people wanted more after it was finished. And they realized it's part of like I think 7-book series. I haven't finished the series, but people started buying the books. They were bestsellers. And then people were done with those books and they wanted more. And they were moving into authors like Lisa Kleypas, who I think is one of the peak like historical romance writers, just like, and it's gone from there. I was really active on Reddit, surprisingly. I'd never touched Reddit before, but the romance community there is so awesome. And if you're like, I loved this aspect of this Bridgerton book, they'll give you 6 different recommendations or help you, like me, segue into contemporary reading with, for me, it was Talia Hibbert. I really liked to read interracial romances because that reflects my relationship, and just, I want to add more diversity to my books. But yeah, I think it's been great for the genre because it's kind of, everyone at first is like, oh, this series is so sexy. But, my fiance watched it with me and he really liked it. He's like, the Duke's got swag. And I don't think he would say that about like Fabio on the cover of like an 80s romance novel, be like, oh, he has swag. So I think it's been really good. I'm curious to see where we go next, right? Because I've seen romance diverge kind of two ways, right? We've got these like cartoon covers, and I think Dani Brown's book is a good example of a cartoon cover, right? And then I'm sure you guys can all picture like the clinch cover romances of the 90s, like the Fabio with the blowing hair.
Or like they don't even have a face. It's just like an oiled torso.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Like they're like dark romances and it's just like some dude. Oh my gosh. I'm sorry. I could talk about this forever, but romance novels even do that. Like, just by looking at a cover what you're getting. I think cartoon covers are the first of the genre that don't explain. Like, I'm sorry, looking at this cover, do I think they're going to break a table having sex? Absolutely not. Like, I would never think that.
It looks too cute. It looks like there's like a little like social media icons and like they're gazing into each other's eyes in a very adorable way. Like
it almost looks like a YA novel, which is also why I think spicy is important because like, dude, if my 16-year-old sister was reading this, I mean, who knows with kids these days, but like I would have been like scandalized.
Especially because, like, Meg Cabot, we were talking about Meg Cabot. So she wrote the Princess Diaries series, if anyone's familiar with that phenomenon.
Oh, yes.
So huge in the YA novel, but she gives the recommendation on the back. I remember reading that and thinking, like, I'm sure Meg Cabot has wrote a lot of other things, and it's a huge name to have promoting your book. But yeah, I also feel like maybe there's another way to, like, blend these. Like, not doing, like, the really ridiculous photos that people are going to be embarrassed to carry the book around.
Right.
But, like, maybe not have a YA author on the back of a 4 chilies out of 5 spicy novel. I don't know. I'm not as involved in the community and the publishing world to know how these decisions are made.
It reminds me of the Crazy Rich Asians covers. It has a similar style. I have not read those, so I don't know how spicy those are, but I think they're less so.
They are not spicy. They're, I think, if anything, fade to black.
Yeah, I was going to say, the movie wasn't spicy, but I don't know what they, like, adapted. So.
Yeah.
But I will say, like, with romance, too, they used to have they don't do it as much anymore, but they'd have a step back, which was, like, there was that big kind of, like, sprawling picture of them together and the inside, and the front was a little more PG. Like, maybe we bring back a step back. Like, I would love to see Zaph and Dani in, like, a kind of compromising, like, campy pose. I mean, just for the diversity's sake, like you're used to like 2 white people, like a Fabio looking dude and like a woman with like blonde hair or whatever, kind of like embracing. I'd love to see a girl with like a pink buzz cut and a guy who looks like Zaph like doing that, but maybe that's just me.
Yeah, I was curious. I was thinking too, like when I saw Bridgerton, my first thought is like, this is a modern take on like Jane Austen, because the period looks similar. If you don't know anything about the series, like I don't really know much, like that's kind of the vibe I got. Like there's balls and gowns and like society, there's a duke, like things like that I'm like, oh, so like perhaps people were like open to it because maybe they like me associate it with something that's more canon and like appropriate, like Jane Austen, where it's, you know, it was written so long ago. There are the hints of spice, and that's like, whoa, they've made eye contact, holy cow. And we have to like explain to ourselves and to other readers like why this was considered like intimate at the time. So I think that might be my theory, is why Bridgerton on the outside looked like something like an easier gateway for so many people to get into the genre, because maybe it had that kind of like cleaned up approach, and because there's so many like Pride and Prejudice stands out there that would be interested in something new.
Yeah, I feel like people would ask me if I'd watched it because I enjoy a period drama, I'm not gonna lie.
Yep.
Certain kinds. I really didn't like. I think I only made it through about 1 season of Downton Abbey till I just got so fed up. I was like, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen in my life. I can't watch anymore. I don't know what that tells you, but yeah, it was definitely marketed as like, this is like a more diverse period drama, but directed by Shonda Rhimes. Yeah, created by Shonda Rhimes, right? So you know you're going to get some camp, you know you're going to get some drama, some cheesiness, but it's going to be like, she directed the Princess Diaries movies, you know, like, or she wrote them. Did she direct them? I think she wrote them. Anyway, so we have some associations with that, but it's it's going to be a bit more soapy. But I don't think anyone had, unless they had read the books, I don't think anyone had a romance novel association with it. Like, I think the people who would like the show are the people who liked, like, Outlander or something.
Yep.
More along those lines, rather than Pride and Prejudice. But obviously, I think there's going to be a huge overlap. Anyway, yeah, so I sit down to watch this show, and it gets towards the middle, and, like, I'm like, this is usually where the show would end. They're getting married. We have 5 more episodes. Like, what's gonna happen?
Them getting married is like the linchpin to the spy. Like, that's when...
Well, my question was answered, and it is that they have so much sex. That's the second half of the show. But I didn't really like how, in terms of narrative structure, was not a fan of how they arranged everything. And so there were things towards the end that made me very mad. And there was so much queer baiting in that show. Oh my God. So much rage. So I think by the end, the characters I was invested in, I did not like their plot lines at all. They just basically got no character development. And anyway, so from like an overarching, like as a writer coming to this show, it was not what people had sort of pitched to me. But I could definitely see how you could come into it just being open to whatever, and then being kind of like, oh my God. But if you're into it, it was like a very widely accepted and talked about phenomenon. You know, the actors were on talk shows and stuff and generally accepted. It wasn't treated the same way, with the same kind of disdain as, like, the 50 Shades movies or even the Twilight movies.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
I think it was very intentional that they were quieter about this is based on a book series. And then they kind of did the reverse. And it really catapulted the books. And I do see, like, the critiques that you have, which I think are completely valid, are actually some of the flaws in the book. So Julia Quinn wrote those books early 2000s. So they're not a diverse character. That was like a Shonda choice, which I'm immensely grateful for. But each book focuses on one couple, right? So all that kind of like other interpersonal drama on the sides is kind of like bringing in stuff from that. But I think this is a really big step for romance novels. I think there's a lot of really good ones that I think could make amazing movies. One of my recommendations for people who like this book is Red, White, and Royal Blue, which is being made into a movie. Ooh. And that whole book I could picture as a movie. Like, I am so excited to see it done, but I want to see it done well, right? Like, I really hope they do it carefully, because it's hard to adapt. I have a ton of, like, I really believe in people who adapt books to movies. It is probably extremely, extremely hard, but I think this is a good starting point, and it's started a discussion, and it's taken away some of the like shame of liking a sexy, campy historical romance. Like, I'm sorry, I wanted to know what happened to Elizabeth and Darcy after they got married. Like, that was the big ooh at the end of the 2005 movie, that they showed them kissing in front of that reflective pool. I'm like, they didn't even show that part in the British version. Like, it wasn't shown in theaters because it wasn't part of the like book.
That's so fascinating.
Wait, really?
Yes, they did not show that part. But yeah, historical romance is essentially that. You're going to get more of the, like, that other half that's not explored.
It really catches you by surprise. If that was intentional, I think that's kind of a smart move, right? Because people are already so invested. Yeah. So they're like, well, I'm not going to stop now.
And it's removing kind of that Disney princessification. I just made that word up. Of, like, they're happily ever after, tie it in a bow. When it's like...
Right.
In Bridgerton, they tackle, like, discussions about having children and all these other things that, like, could be really interesting topics to explore. But once again, we're getting into that, like, emotional development and the things that go into a relationship. And it doesn't just end with getting married. So, yeah, I could talk about historical romance all day.
In the past, we have done a segment called Shoutouts and Shutdowns, which was where Julie and I and our guests would... mention anything that we loved about the book, whether it's a plot point or a character that we didn't get a chance to touch on, or if we had a problem, like, we love this book, 8 out of 10, here's the 2 bits that were like, why did they include that? Or we didn't like how they treated that character, that plot point. So things that we didn't talk about today that I think are, like, amazing elements of this book is that Dani Brown has awesome relationships with her sisters and her best friend. And we get really awesome female friendships that are not, like, they're there to support each other because the center story is about a relationship. Like, they are talking about Zaf, but they're really there for Dani and her well-being and, like, her as a person. So when we open up and it's, like, a very witchy scene, it's Dani connecting with her grandmother and, like, history of their family and their culture, as well as having this moment with her friend. And, like, I think that's a wonderful way to start the book, of, like, Dani centered with other women, and she's not, like, this lone woman who doesn't have time for anyone in her life, including friends, and then she finally makes time for one man. It's like she doesn't have time for any relationships except for these important women in her life, and now she makes room for a romantic partner as well. I think that's wonderful. Yeah, I don't have any of the strong shutdowns, but I really wanted to talk about female friendship.
That is such an important part of romance novels for me too. Like, I hate it when it essentially doesn't pass the Bechdel test. Like, if it's just a hero, if it's a straight couple, hero and heroine, no friends, like, this is not real.
Yeah.
Where are your friends?
Yeah.
Where
are they, girl? Talk to them.
That was mine as well, actually. When you suggested this, I was like, oh, I was gonna talk about how much I loved all her relationships with the women in her life. Though I will add her obsession with plants.
Yes.
But particularly during the pandemic, I feel like Victoria and I just continued finding and adding plants to our home, and I am now kind of obsessed with them, and I'm just collecting them in my little apartment, and I have one window I can put them next to, but just the fact that every time you see her, all her rooms are overrun with plants made me chuckle.
I love that too. My shout out is to his, his organization that Zaf runs.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about that.
Teaching young boys how to, like, tackle their emotions through sport. I'm just like, this man is written by a woman, but, like, I was just like, oh my God, like, why isn't this a real thing? I hope it is, because I just thought that was so beautiful.
Yeah.
Some listeners might know this. One of my clients is a parenting resource, and we had a webinar specifically around coping with canceled and changed sports seasons during the pandemic. Like, that's a big activity for youth, and not having that outlet and that team during the pandemic has been really difficult for families. But there's a really great organization called We Coach, founded by Megan Bartlett, and they do a lot of, like, mental health informed coaching practices and, like, working, like, these bigger, like, coping strategies, kind of like what Zaf does with his rugby players, like, into their sports education and their team building. And there's also an organization that joined us for that webinar called Sidelined USA, and it's specifically for athletes who are no longer able to compete in the same way, whether it's through injury or different circumstances, and kind of, like, coming to terms with, like, recognizing what they gain out of sports without necessarily losing their entire identity when they're no longer able to compete, which also was, like, echoes of Zaf when he, like, had to step away from professional play. That was a total tangent, but when you're like, I wonder if this exists, I'm like, I know of a couple that are kind of focused on using sports as a means to teach, like, about mental health.
I think that's so great.
Okay, so recommendations. Yes. Chelsea, for people who enjoyed Take a Hint, Dani Brown, what would you recommend they check out next?
Okay, well, obviously, please read the rest of the Brown sister books. Like, that should be a given. I would recommend reading Get a Life, Chloe Brown first. Also, I did not realize, but Talia Hibbert has a huge backlog of books that she's written, and all of them seem to have pretty rave reviews. I'm still working my way through. For spooky season, I did read Mating the Huntress, which was her first paranormal romance, which was me trying a new genre. He is like a werewolf and she is a werewolf hunter. And yes, it sounds cheesy, but it is really good. It's really short. It's almost a novella. And it is, you know how there's a lot of, like, holiday, Christmassy, that kind of time of year romances? There's no Halloween romances, but this one is one. And it is so good. So The next one is, to me, a classic. It was only, I think, published in 2019. But for contemporary romance readers, Red, White, and Royal Blue is so good. I think this was I read this when it came out in 2019, when I was starting to dip my toes back into romance, and, like, so good. The president's son, who is a Latino boy, and the Prince of England, who is a teen in this book. I think they're like between 18 and 22. They don't like each other. They have to fake being buddies for diplomatic relations, and go figure, they fall in love. And it is everything. I mean, you've got like the political intrigue because his mom is the first Latina president. This was during Trump era, so this book was just pure escapism for me. I loved it so much. But it is just so good. Anything Casey McQuiston writes, she just came out with her second book, is just so good. It's queer, and it's not like pandering. Such good writing, similar to Talia Hibbert. It's a little less spicy, but still kind of spicy, so be prepared. And the last one I will recommend, I have not read this series, but it feels like it's gotten a lot of rave reviews, and it's right up on my TBR to read next. Is called The Bromance Book Club. It's another series. So if you vibed with Zaf and kind of his use of romance novels to help his emotional development, this series is about men who are dealing with their own kind of issues with their partners. Some are married, some are trying to find a partner, blah, blah, blah. And they start reading romance novels. I think it's based in Nashville.
I should read that. I'm in Nashville right now. I love reading books like based in where I'm at. Okay.
It's
moving
on
that
my
up
up to read next, so I will let you know. But it's gotten rave reviews, and I just love the concept of men reading romance novels to gain emotional intelligence. It's just like, maybe that's my favorite trope. I don't know.
Yeah, like, I've not read a ton of romance that I would like shout about. We've talked about Jasmine Guillory on this podcast before. Really enjoy her writing. My partner and I have been watching Big Mouth, the TV series, which is not like romantic by many means, but it's very crass. And but it's also just great conversation about things that are like difficult and awkward about puberty. And even as like a 20-something, you're like, yeah, that was messed up. Or like, we still use that like awkwardness. We just got through the whole section with the shame wizard, which was like, so well done, but also I'm like, I hate this because this reminds me of all the shame I've carried in my life. But then it's like, then I was like channeling some Brene Brown, and I'm like, but they're so right, because like when, you know, shame is strong in silence, or whatever her phrase is, whereas once we speak about our shame, it loses its power. So anyways, on that thread, if you want to read more about vulnerability, Brene Brown's Daring Greatly and The Power of Vulnerability, her TED Talk, are wonderful starting places for much of the vulnerability that Zaf and Dani navigate in this novel.
I love that.
Yeah. I was really struggling to come up with recommendations, and I decided to make a list of every single romantic thing that I have ever consumed and enjoyed. There are about 5 of them. So I'm just going to list them off. They're all kind of alternative, like they're all kind of slightly different from the norm for various reasons. So one is the Bright Sessions podcast. It's a narrative sci-fi podcast that's got a solid queer romance in it. Sex Education on Netflix. I'm obsessed with that show. All about relationships. I think it leads to some similar things that Big Mouth does, but in a more realistic way.
You mean there aren't cartoon hormone monsters running around?
It's not so surrealist and cartoonish, but I think has a similar effect and is just beautiful. I think the most romancy thing I have ever watched and been obsessed with is The Untamed, the Chinese gay romance show.
Love it.
It's got an amazing story, and I was really shocked about how much I loved it, and I've watched it about 3 times. And then one of the books that we did on this podcast, The Rosie Project, which is like a whole series. I think there's a trilogy where the main character is autistic. That was my very first romance novel, and I was like, yeah, I can do this. So yeah, that's my list. So there you go. If you're not a romance person, give these a try.
So things that we are currently obsessed, we'll close out with little things, big things in our life that are bringing us joy. Julia, do you want to start?
Yeah. I have surprisingly not consumed any new media since the last time we recorded an episode.
Which was like Wednesday, so it's fine.
It's
was
been
like
4 days
ago.
I went to the one Asian market in this Belgian town that had all the countries, all the products from all the countries in one place. And I found this like powdered ginger matcha latte mix that you just pour boiling water in. And it is rocking my world. It's the best thing I've ever tasted. It's so good. I drink it multiple times a day. I'm sure it's got a lot of sugar in it, but it's really, really good.
Okay, Chelsea, what about you?
I have two things. I feel like Julia already kind of teed it up. I'm obsessed with Sex Education on Netflix. I finished it last week, and like, you want to talk about some show that I think should be required viewing for any young adult. I mean, this actually kind of blends into the romance talk a lot as well, too, because at first it was very graphic sex, and I was like, whoa, buddy, like, that's a lot. But this show is so important, and the diversity of the characters, the trauma, and just things that they deal with emotionally, the writing is impeccable, and I sobbed probably every single episode from the end of season 2 onward, and a lot of it was happy crying, but just like, I'm just like, women are amazing, and I love them.
Oh my
and
God, yeah.
We are just such powerful, beautiful creatures, and yeah, I love that. And I think I'm also reading Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski. I think that's how you say her name. And that is also a book about just like sex and body parts and normalizing. And I think those two just pair super well together. And oh my God, I can't talk about it enough. I'm obsessed with it.
The main thing I'm obsessed right now is I am reading through the Percy Jackson series. Reread the first one for the podcast, and I like put it aside for a while, and then I've blown through books 2, 3, and now 4 in like the last week and a half. So just love some, Greek mythology plus YA fiction. It's just great.
I love that. I love revisiting things that maybe we didn't let our child selves enjoy and now we enjoy as adults. Like, not being ashamed to like the things that people shamed you into not liking when you were young.
Yes.
I will die on that hill.
Amen. Love
Which
it.
is the whole thing of romance novels. Like, they're not my thing, but I am absolutely on that same journey of like letting yourself need the things you need and letting yourself enjoy the things you enjoy, even if everyone else thinks it's cringy or awkward or weird or whatever. Why else would you, what's the point of being an adult if you can't do the things you weren't able to do as a child?
Yes, 100%, Julia, you said it.
Well, you can follow Chelsea on Instagram at chelsea.is.reading, and we'd love to hear all of you listeners, your thoughts on romance novels. Hit us up on Instagram or message through our website. But thank you, Chelsea, so much for joining us.
Thank you both. I had a blast. Thank you for listening to me on my romance soapbox.
Always. Thank you for listening to Book Club with Julia and Victoria. We would love to hear your thoughts on this book or the topic we discussed, so you can share your review and recommendations with us on Instagram at bookclubwithjv, on our website, bookclubwithjv.com, or by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. You can also visit our website for show notes with links to all of the recommendations and the things bringing us joy. If you don't already, go ahead and follow us on whichever podcast platform you are listening on so that you can be notified when our next episode is released. This episode was co-hosted and produced by myself, Victoria Bruick, along with Julia Clausen. Rebecca Gasme provides us with project management support. Our music is composed by Greg Bruick, and our logo was designed by Gabby Febland. Until next time, happy reading.